Welcome to Unbroken the Podcast. I'm Savannah Levins. I started this podcast because in my life experience and working as a news reporter, I found everyone's been knocked down or blindsided or had their world seemingly turned upside down at some point. And for many people, it's cathartic to talk about their experiences out loud. And likewise, it can be therapeutic to hear other people's stories and know that there is light at the end of all darkness. If you have a story you'd like to share on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. Just email unbrokenthepodcast@gmail.com and please rate, review, and subscribe. Today on the podcast, we have Tiffany. Tiffany was on vacation snorkeling when she was attacked by a shark. No lie, it's such a crazy story. I'm not going to give too much away here, but it's really a miracle that she escaped with her life, and the attitude she has about it now will no doubt inspire you. Here's Tiffany. Hey, Tiffany, thank you so much for coming in.
Yes.
I appreciate it. And this is going to be one of those episodes where before I ask any questions, I just love for you to kind of walk me through your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were on a vacation 2 years ago, my husband and I, on a cruise. We actually love to cruise. We coined ourselves vacation junkies. And so
who isn't?
Yeah, I know, exactly. And cruising is one of our favorites. So this year we had planned to go with the two of us on a new ship, actually. And the last stop was Nassau, Bahamas. And so when we docked there, we basically just, bartered for the good deal of, an excursion with the locals. That's what we love to do. And we did parasailing and snorkeling. And then when we got out there, we parasailed first, which was amazing. And then they switched us onto the snorkel boat. And this type of excursion, because it was a water sports company, you can kind of pick and choose what you wanted to do. So there was only 2 other folks that went with us out to the snorkel site. So it was real small compared to what we've done in the past. And when we went out there, the boat ride out was like real choppy. And it was only like 5 minutes from Paradise Island where the reef was. But it really upset my husband's stomach. He was a mess. And so he thought, well, I'll just get in and snorkel with you for a little bit and hopefully that will help. But after about 20 minutes of snorkeling together, he decided to go back to the boat because it wasn't getting any better. But I stayed out there because it had only been 20 minutes and I love to snorkel and just really get an appreciation for, just God's creation under the water and just it was beautiful. And so that's what I did. I felt like I was getting lost in that world again. And we think it had only been about 10 minutes from the time my husband went back to the boat and I was out there that I felt like I had bumped into something. And really that was a thought that went through my mind was, oh, what did I bump into? It was very casual. So I turned to my right to see what I bumped into, and I was face to face with a shark, and he had my whole arm in his mouth. I have a mark that is about, 6 inches from my shoulder, where he first latched on, and we were face to face. And I remember just fear taking over. I started to have visions of my kids coming out from like my peripheral vision, like a movie reel. It felt as if my body was giving up. But I felt a strength of the Lord just come out from inside me to give me the strength to fight. And I had to really just push those thoughts back and be like, no, I will not die. You are not going to take my life. I refuse. And I started yanking. And of course, there's a flurry of motion. That's when it was almost like a trigger for him to be like, okay, well, then game on, And he began to fight me back. And I was screaming through the snorkel tube, but snorkel tubes, you can't really articulate words. All you hear is like, and so nobody knew what was going on.
How far away were you from the boat?
I was probably about 50 feet or so.
Oh my gosh.
But what I learned later is that my husband actually got sick on the boat, and so they were cleaning that up. He got in the water to wash himself off, all while this is going on. So it was like a distraction happening. So nobody knew that I was fighting for my life like 50 feet away from them. And so, I'm yanking and pulling, and finally his jaws open, and I was yanking, so my arm kind of just flew out, and it was gone. It was a mangled stump, and I remember just in shock, like, oh my gosh, my arm's gone, and I didn't stay in that moment, though. That's what's so amazing is I didn't go into shock. I didn't panic. Like, I just flipped off my snorkel mask. I was already at surface level, and I just screamed out, help me, Jesus. And I began to swim back to the boat. He amputated my right arm, which is my dominant arm. And so I had my left arm to swim with. So I'm swimming with it, and I look up and I see my husband turn. He had just got out of the water to wash himself off, and he turns, and the terror that's on his eyes, like I'll never forget that look. It was just sheer terror. And he said that it was as if he was in some horror movie, because he sees my arm is just mangled, up out of the water, because I had elevated it up as I was swimming, and it was just shooting blood everywhere, and there's literally blood like saturated in the water, and he screams out, "Baby!" and he jumps in the water, and all the while I feel as if that shark is literally right behind me. Like right. I felt as if he was going to grab my leg, grab my side, like it was as if, like I could feel him. And I'm just praying, like, get me to that boat, and he got to me. I basically swam pretty much the entire way, all but about 10 feet. And that's when he met me in the water. And he said the first thing he noticed was the big, huge, like, gash where he first bit me. Mm-hmm. It was just, like, flapping and, but he heard me praying. Mm. And so we get to the boat, and the captain had threw out a rope, and I was using that to get in the last little bit. And, I mean, my husband just basically launched me into the boat, and the captain had grabbed my left arm. And I'm telling you, the minute I hit that boat, I felt a peace like I have never felt before. It was as if I was surrounded in a cloud of peace. And I looked at my husband and I said, "Give me something to stop the bleeding." I was urgent, but I wasn't panicked. I wasn't hysterical. Like, I didn't pass out. Like, I knew what needed to be done. And he is frantic. His eyes are like golf balls, running around trying to find something. There was no med kit. The captain was grabbing the anchor. The two that were with us were huddled at the front of the boat, just shaking in fear. And I'm like scanning, trying to find something, and I see our beach towel that the cruise line gives us sticking out of our bag underneath the boat seat. And so I tell my husband, "Go grab that beach towel." And so he runs and grabs it. And I don't know if you guys know anything about beach towels, but for the ones that the cruise lines give you, they're bulky and massive, but that's all we had. So we used it, and I walked him through like how to tourniquet my arm with this beach towel. And I remember telling him, tighter, because he's like putting it on there, but I could feel my blood just gushing down my arm. And so I kept telling him, "You need to go tighter. You're not going to hurt me. Just do it as tight as you possibly can." And so he's shaking, trying to get it so tight. And I told him, "Keep my arm elevated up. I'm going to lay my head on your lap." And I just closed my eyes because I really didn't want to be looking at my blood was everywhere, and I didn't want to be staring at all that. And so we kind of started to make our way back to Paradise Island, which was the 5-minute boat ride. So that didn't seem like it took very long. But once we like basically beached the boat there, we're yelling out, "Shark attack," 911, we need emergency hospital, like everything that you could think of to get these people's attention. And they were just kind of like, what's going on? Just oblivious. And finally, when they realized how severe it was, they told us, "You're going to have to go to the main port because there's not a hospital on Paradise Island." No. It's like the touristy section. So we had to back the boat out and go an additional 20 minutes to the main port. So we believe I was on the boat for a good 20 to 30 minutes before I got medical attention. And when I think about just even that journey, I never lost consciousness. In fact, when I got into the ambulance, I was on oxygen. They started unwrapping my towel. That's when I first felt pain, was then. So probably 30, 40 minutes from the time the attack happened. And I heard them talking outside of the ambulance, and they were asking my husband, "Where should we take her?" They're all urgent. And my husband's like, "Just wherever the closest, hospital is." And because there was a couple different options. And I like removed my oxygen mask and yelled out, "Make sure they take our insurance." Like, I just think about like
the fact that you had this clarity.
Right. I knew what was going on. Like I wasn't in any kind of fog or haze or, in and out. Like I remember everything all up until they actually put me under to go into surgery, which just amazes me because of the blood loss and, that I didn't bleed out, because I've talked to several medical professionals, all the ones that, been involved in my case, but then I've shared my story in so many different forums, and everybody that has any kind of medical background says, Tiffany, you do not make sense. Like medically, we can't wrap our heads around what you went through. Like you are a miracle.
Yeah.
And that just, every time I think about that, I just get overwhelmed, because not only didn't I bleed out, obviously I'm here and alive and able to share it, but we found out later that I didn't even require a blood transfusion because I didn't lose enough blood. So the miracles that surrounded me in this journey are just, there's no words.
Yeah. And I know, because I've read about your story before, that you credit God for a lot of that. Can you talk about how your faith played a role in those moments and in your healing?
Yeah. And like I said, I could feel his presence, his peace surrounding me in the boat. I was praying on the way to the shore, and I remember just really not knowing what to pray, and I felt like God was depositing prayers in me, and I began to pray over my husband to give him strength, to give him wisdom. Like he's not the one that deals with logistics normally, that's me, and so I'm like, Lord, give him clarity of mind, I started praying over my kids. I have 3 young ones, help them understand, I prayed for the doctors that, I'm not in America, and so I didn't know what I was going to be facing going to the hospital there. Give them wisdom, give them the ability to take care of me, And then I prayed in that boat that God, do something with this, use this somehow. Like this had to have happened for a reason, and I know that you're going to use it. And I think back on that, and that was moments after it happened. And so every time I get to share my story in any form, whether it be one-on-one or in a media or on a podcast or whatever, I see him answering the prayer in that boat just moments after the attack happened, which is just an amazing honor.
And how old were your kids at the time?
So my oldest was about to turn 6. So she was 5, going to be 6. My middle was 4, and my youngest was going to be 2 the next week. She turned 2 the week after. So very, very young. And we actually decided not to tell them the details of what happened, only because they were so young and they were going to be surrounded by me every day. And I didn't want to be a constant reminder of fear for them. So we really prayed about how do we handle this, and we both felt like, obviously, we need to tell them that I went through something, because they're not going to, they're going to notice that my arm is gone and I'm going to have this long recovery process. And so we shared with them, that I had an accident, but we kept it very high level, which honestly was very difficult, because people were in and out of our house for months. We had media interviews, people, Today's Show and Inside Edition came to our house, and so there's a lot of logistics of trying to protect their minds in this. Totally. But God was so faithful in doing that and giving us peace in that. And we actually just told them, I think it's been about 2 months. And that was, once we were able to tell them, we felt like it was the timing. It was totally God's timing, because we saw them respond peacefully, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And they were able to maturely think about, even though my youngest, she's 4 now, but so I don't know how much she fully grasped, but it wasn't a somber moment. It was wow, you're here and alive, and God is good. Wow, that was the reaction. And so I'm so thankful, that we listened to the Lord and the wisdom in that, because it could have been much worse. We could be all in a family of dealing with stuff, ongoing, but we chose to be obedient in his timing.
Going back a little bit, so you get to the hospital. When did things start kind of settling in your mind for you? Like, okay, this happened. You know, I assume you came out of surgery and then they told you, did they have to amputate the rest of your arm?
No, he amputated it in the
shark
water.
Did.
Yes.
Took it all. Wow.
Took everything. And that's why it's such a miracle that I survived, because it wasn't just like dangling there. Like it severed it completely. So when I woke up out of surgery in the Bahamas, it was quite the ordeal, because they have like a women's ward that they put women patients in. So it was a room full of 10 to 15 people that had just like curtain barriers, but I could see everybody. And there's this loud TV blaring right next and the wall next to me. And I was just like overstimulated, like what the heck is going on? And a little overwhelmed, like, what now? You know, I'm in this foreign country, and I'm trying to wrap my head around, you know, what the heck? And it was a lot of flurry of information and trying to get me back to the U.S., because if you know anything about cruises, you don't have to have a passport to cruise. You can use your driver's license and birth certificate. So that's what we did. Mistake number one, we will never make that again, because once we stayed overnight in Nassau, it became this big ordeal of trying to get us back.
Because the cruise is gone and you don't have passports.
Exactly. So that was another just huge miracle of God kind of moving the mountains for us to get back. We were told that it was impossible on Saturday. So this happened on Friday. On Saturday, they told us, you will not be able to get out of here until Tuesday, because the U.S. Embassy had to get involved, and they were closed for a holiday. So they're always closed on the weekend. And then Monday was the extended holiday, so they weren't going to be open till Tuesday. So they said the earliest you're going to be able to get back is Tuesday. And this was Saturday. And I remember being in so much pain, I literally couldn't adjust myself in the bed. And so when they told me this, I looked at my husband and I said, no. That is not going to fly. Like, that can't be. And I told him, we serve a God of the impossible. Like, it's now or never. Like, do we believe what we say we believe or not, you know? And so we just began to stand on the word of the Lord and just believing that he's going to move the mountains just like he says he will in his word. And we got a call from my pastor up here in the Charlotte area. And he was just checking in, you know, and we gave him the update. Like, they're telling us it's impossible. And he said, that's not good enough. I said, that's what I said. You know? And so he's like, we're going to, we're going to believe with you, and we're going to pray, and we'll get our intercessor team involved. And everybody started to pray. And God reminded my pastor's wife about a girl that they used to know that did private chartering for planes. She used to attend the church. And so they reached out to her. They hadn't talked to her in a while. She actually now works for a medvac company out of Charlotte. And so she began working on the case. It was still kind of gloomy when they talked to her, because she's like, even though it's medvac, we have to prove that it's medically necessary. And being that she's not life or death, but she's in critical care, this is going to be like really difficult, you know, there's going to be hurdles that we need to cross here. And so they began working on my case. She actually got in contact with the medvac company in the Bahamas. And the only reason why they know each other is because the guy in the Bahamas has a fiance that lives in Charlotte. What are the odds, right?
Yeah.
And so he had made connection with him. We found out 2 months prior. And the only reason why I was thinking is like, well, you never know what might happen. So I should probably, you know, I'm up here all the time. I should make connection with these guys. And that was 2 months before this happened.
Wow.
So that connection was totally the Lord, and they were able to figure out ways to get me back. And so I landed wheels down Sunday morning, 6 a.m., and they told me it's impossible for you to get here until Tuesday. And that was Charlotte. I went to Charlotte CMC, or the CMC Maine in Charlotte. And that is when really everything kind of hit me.
I was about to say, because I feel like
there was so much going on.
Yeah, it was live, 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 survive, survive, survive.
Yes.
Get home, get home, get home.
Yes.
Now you're home.
Right.
And you don't have an arm. You know, like,
right.
when did that come crashing down on you, and how did you, like, cope with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's really... And it was still, like, even in the midst of getting there, and... it was a flurry of like, okay, do we send her right back into surgery? They weren't sure where I was at, so they had to they opened up everything like bedside to see how bad it was to determine whether I needed to go into surgery right away. And I was thankful that the team in the Bahamas made the executive decision to not do too much because they knew their limitations, and they told my husband that, like, we did all we can do, but she needs to see an American doctor immediately. So I was thankful that they had wisdom on that because they left me in a really good shape. So they determined when they opened me up, like bedside, that I think you're good enough to be first thing surgery tomorrow morning instead of having to rush me back. So then that was a blessing because then I could just like breathe, I had time to sleep because we hadn't slept in 36 hours. And the first time I used the restroom was when it kind of just hit me because here I am, kind of sore and pain, and the toilet paper was on my right side. And I remember going to grab it, and, I'm like, I've got like this club for an arm right now because it's all bandaged up and it's huge. It's all, swollen and I can't, I have to reach over, and it was painful. And then I'm like, how do I rip the toilet paper? Because I can't use this. Now I can use this arm to do things. I can use it to hold things. Mm-hmm. But then it was so sensitive, I couldn't put any kind of pressure on it. And so I'm like, trying to twist it and tear it. Yeah. And I finally get it off and I'm like, oh my gosh, and then I go out to wash my hands and I start rubbing my hand and I realize, how am I going to get the back of my hand? And then that's when I start tearing up, washing my hands and realizing every little thing I'm doing is impacted. And I'm going to have to figure out a new normal for a lot of things. And so it starts overwhelming me, and I start to get teary-eyed, and my husband's there and he sees me, in the mirror, and he comes over and he's like, is everything okay? And I'm like, I'm just realizing how much this is going to impact my everyday life. And he just embraces me and he says, we're just going to have to figure out what that new normal looks like for us. And I remember just crying in his arms, just like, I know this. I know God's going to give us the strength in this. But it's overwhelming right now. And so, I had to have that moment of just vulnerability of grieving, it's a loss. It's a form of a loss. And so that happened, fairly quickly after everything kind of calmed down. But, and then it was just moments after that, of course, where anytime where I was alone for a little bit, where there wasn't visitors or, my husband had fallen asleep or, the kids were downstairs or whatever, anytime where I was alone for moments, I would start to think about what happened. And not in a PTSD type, fearful way, but just overwhelmed that I was here. I shouldn't be here. And just pure thankfulness that I'm alive, and just how good my God is. And especially when I got to see my kids for the first time, I can't even put into words what that was like to embrace them. And it was overwhelming. And I tried not to lose it because I didn't want, for them to be like, what the heck, but I was just, tears were just streaming down my face. And I remember just hugging them and so thankful that I had that moment with them and they still had their mom. Yeah. And my son was a little bit fearful when he first came up. As my husband actually got to go to the house and explain to them, Mommy had an accident, and, so they need to prepare them, But when my son came up, he's standing at the edge of the bed, and the two girls jumped in my lap, and I'm hugging them, and I looked at my son, and he's kind of just his eyes are all big, and he's looking at my arm, and he's looking at me, and I said, Bud, you're not going to hurt me. Get up here, Mm-hmm. And he had this big smile on his face, and he finally just jumped up on the bed, and they were very cautious of my arm, but it was once we were all able to hug each other and we were talking and stuff, it was okay, Mommy's here, it's okay, And that's what we focused on. Anytime questions came up from them because we didn't tell them the details, it was I answered some, but if it got too detailed, I'm all you need to worry about is I'm here and alive, and that's all that matters, And that was kind of our motto, like, I'm here and alive. So if it gets frustrating, in the end, I'm here and alive. Like, if I can't tie my shoes, doesn't really matter. Like, I'm here and alive, you know? So that ended up being kind of my, like, what I stood on. Like, in the end, I can't worry about the little things because I shouldn't even be here.
Yeah. Do you think that's what gave you the most strength during that time?
Absolutely. And I think that was straight from the Lord, you know, and a lot of people that I've talked to afterwards are like, gosh, you're so strong. Like, and I look at them, I'm like, no, I'm actually not strong. In fact, I'm probably one of the weakest because you know yourself the most, right? And you're, but what I'm leaning on is God's strength in that. And anytime where I feel like I don't have anything left and I'm getting frustrated and this is just a lot, I just open up the Bible or I sit down and close my eyes. I'm like, God, I need you right now. Like, I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
And that's when he comes through, because what's awesome about the Lord is peace can come regardless of the turmoil, and joy can come regardless of the sadness, and strength can come regardless of the weakness. And that's what I've been leaning on, is his strength, his love, his peace, his joy. Even though I don't feel it right now, I know that I can have it because that's what his word says. And so that's literally, I'll just declare that over. Like, I don't feel joy right now, but I know I can have it. So God, give me your joy. You know, when I'm in the middle of a moment of just frustration, give me your peace, Lord, because I know that's what I can have. And that is what has really propelled me into even sharing more and getting on platforms where I'm able to share about the choices after something happens. So, you know, whether you have a choice in the circumstance or not, which a lot of times life comes at us, right? And we're not quite sure, you know, where this came from. Did we do anything to deserve it? You know, all of these questions of why. So we may not have a choice in the circumstance we're in, but we always have a choice in the response. And that is what was a game changer for me, is my response. I didn't have a choice in whether the shark attacked me or not. It just happened. But I had a choice in how I was going to respond. And that has changed everything.
You sitting here across from me today, you know, 2 years after this horrible thing happened, you have all this clarity now, I feel, and I feel your faith is so strong. But I think a lot of people might relate to being in the pit of darkness and wanting to hold on to faith and wanting to hold on to hope, but really finding it difficult. Especially when it feels like your world has just crashed around you. And a lot of people might say, well, God, why would you let this happen? Did you go through moments like that? And how did you push through that and get to the place where you are today?
Yeah. I don't think I ever got to a point of questioning why, because I could feel his peace around me in the midst of it. And what you put in comes out. So, you know, faith didn't just come out of it because that's what I clung to as a 911 call. Like, I was strong in my faith before, so I think that's why I was able to respond the way I was. But that being said, I'm human, so I'm going to go through times where I'm like, God, why did you decide to do it this way? Like, I'm not going to question your ways, but, like, could you have done it a different way, you know? Like, and I remember pretty early on, I think I had only been home from the hospital a few days, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep, you know, it was like one of those, like, tossing and turning in the bed. I was kind of achy, and so I went downstairs and I put on a Pandora station. I have a station that is Jesus Culture Pandora, and so I threw that on, and I thought, well, I'm just gonna worship because I don't know what else to do. You know, I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm at this place where I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed and I'm in pain, and I don't know what life is going to be like right now. And so I threw that worship station on, and the first song that came on was Kim Walker-Smith, and her song is Healing Oil. And the lyrics to the song says, I can feel your healing oil running down my brow. I wouldn't trade a lifetime for how I feel right now. And I remember that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I fell to my knees and I'm like, yes, Lord, I don't understand it. I don't even really like it right now, but I trust you. Mm-hmm. And that moment of pure vulnerability. Like, I don't have a plan B in this. I don't know what to do right now, but I trust that you're good regardless. And if I could go back and change things, if there was some way for me to rewind time and not go on that excursion and not go in the water, I don't think I would change it, because I know that you're going to use it. And even though it doesn't feel that way right now, even though I'm overwhelmed with all these feelings, like I choose to trust you in this. And that moment of just pure surrender, I think if I look back, I think that was the turning point in my response, because I was able to just say, God, I don't feel it right now, but I trust you, and I trust that you're good regardless. And that is, that's what I would encourage others to do in that moment of just like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I'm at the bottom here, and I'm overwhelmed, to declare his goodness regardless, because he is good, even when we don't feel like it's good. Because in the end, it says in his word that he will make all things good for those who love him. And even though it may not feel good at the time, in the end, it will turn around. And we have to trust that in the midst of feeling like we're at the lowest of lows. And if we're willing to do that, to trust him in the midst, that is when breakthrough happens. Sometimes things don't change right away. Like, I still am missing my arm. Like, that has not changed. But what has changed is my perspective.
Yeah.
And that is what has propelled me to be an overcomer.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is not an easy story for you to tell and retell, obviously, but you've been able to turn this into a testimony and share your story and let other people going through a hard time, which a lot of people who listen to this podcast are, that they're not alone and that there's a light at the end.
Yes.
For those listening who might not have a great relationship with God, like you had a good one going in, like you mentioned, which really helped you. But for those going through a hard time that don't have that, what advice would you give to them? You know, maybe they're trying to have that, but they're really just struggling.
Yeah. I think the best thing that I could say to that is to Google scriptures on whatever it is they're facing. So is it scriptures on depression, scriptures on anxiety, scriptures on sickness, whatever that mountain is in front of them. And you may think like, well, that's not that's not what I was thinking. But when you find a scripture that really speaks to your situation, and I would encourage not just to read one scripture, like that's how you're going to find that one scripture, but look it up in the context of what it is in, because that usually gives more meaning behind it. So read a couple scriptures before and after that, like look up the actual chapter that it gives and stuff, and start declaring that one scripture over yourself. And it may seem a little crazy, but when we speak life, something changes. Because sometimes if we listen to ourselves, we are speaking doubt and frustration and stress and depression. Like the words that we're using are all surrounded in those types of things. No wonder why we feel that way, because that's what we're speaking, right? So if we can change how we're speaking, and I've encouraged people like, write it down or print it out, stick it in on your mirror, you know, where you're going to see it every day, or, you know, on your desk or wherever that is, and literally speak it out loud. Like, Lord, I choose this today. And I'm telling you, something changes when we start speaking life over what we're going through. And it may not be immediate, but I promise you, things will change because your perspective starts to change. And so I've encouraged, I actually just did a girls retreat. It was a teen girls retreat. And I told them, like, make a list over yourself. Like, I choose joy because that's what you say I can have. I choose peace. And like, read the scripture or the reference, you know, and start speaking life over yourself every day. And I'll tell you, you're going to see things change. And that's kind of where it starts, is just the basics of like speaking life.
I mean, your story is so proof to me that you can manifest your own future, your own path, your own happiness, just by taking all of that in and making those everyday decisions to choose joy and happiness over wallowing. Not that being sad is bad. You let yourself be sad, obviously, which you have done.
Yes.
But to choose joy is so strong and incredible. My last question for you, I keep going back to the moment where your husband said, we're just going to have to figure out our new normal. What is your new normal now, today? Where are you now?
A lot has changed. Figuring out the life skills of being an amputee. I just recently got my newest version of my prosthetic, which has allowed me to touch my head and my hair and my body, because before I was stuck straight out because my elbow wasn't functioning. So I'm even learning new skills today. I actually just started trying to curl my hair because I hadn't been able to do anything one-handed. I burnt myself a couple times. It's just part of the process, and I'm a little gun shy, so I'm like, I'll take a break and then, try again. But that's kind of, the process of, I'm still facing things that I haven't tried since then, because it's been 2 years, but it's only been 2 years, Oh,
right.
And so, and just figuring out that new normal of being a mom. And the first week of school for us was this 2 weeks ago. And my husband was on a business trip the first day of school, and I had to do my girls' hair. And, for summer camp, that's one thing because they're going to be hot and sweaty and it doesn't really matter what their hair looks like. But when it's school, I'm like, oh, shoot, this is a different level that I need to be on. And, and I was getting a little anxious about, helping them look their best, and I feel a little inadequate. And so, I'm still facing those, hurdles of, okay, I can do this, and I have to resort back to I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, scripture. And so there's that, of course. But then I've also been able to speak at a lot of different places, both faith-based and non. And I really believe that the Lord's going to open up doors for me to do that more on a full-time basis. And so we officially launched a ministry called Be an Overcomer Ministries last summer, and just giving a name to really what we had been doing, because really since the attack I had been asked to speak, which was crazy because I didn't expect that out of this, and really wasn't sure if this was just a season or if this was going to be what we did from now on, or And so we've been really praying about, God, what do you want to do with this? It's your story, so what do you want to do? And we really felt like it needed to be officially named a ministry and actually launched, and so that's what we did last year, and we've been kind of just prepping for that phase of going into full-time speaking and sharing, and so we're in that phase right now of trying to get our name out there and sharing, we've got something powerful that we feel could change lives, and we would love the opportunity to do it. So that has been a blessing. I get overwhelmed every time I get to share it in any capacity, because I see him using it and I see lives being changed because of it. And that is just a blessing and an honor, and that he chose to use me.
What do you think it is about your story that speaks to people so deeply and might ignite that little flame of faith in others?
I think it's the vulnerability, because I'm not afraid to be vulnerable and to be real, and not try to put on a facade of you can do it. You're going to have moments where it's going to suck. I have those still. Mm-hmm. But it's okay not to be okay, And then also just the power that there is in this story, because it's not just an everyday story that you hear every day. And I think it just reminds us of the God that we serve, because sometimes I know I do this. I put God in a box of well, you can do this, but that is way too much, and we would never say that out loud, but it's in our mindset. And I think after we've experienced what we have and are still experiencing, we're done putting God in a box.
Oh yeah,
he is amazing. And I'll tell you right now, I would not be shocked if he decides to grow up my arm, because that's just the type of God he is. He can do anything. And I think that this story speaks to that, and it reminds people of the power that there is in God, and the hope. Because even in a hopeless situation, there is hope and there is light, like you said, at the end of the tunnel. And so that, I think, is what people connect with. Because, I'm not going to meet a ton of people that have been attacked by a shark, but everybody goes through something.
Yeah.
Everybody's facing some sort of adversity at some point in their life, some that are bigger than others. And so through that struggle, there's still hope.
Mm-hmm. I think sometimes it takes hearing other people's stories to put your own in perspective.
Absolutely.
Because no matter what your struggle, it feels like it's the whole world.
Yeah.
When it's you.
Absolutely.
So I so appreciate you coming in and being so open and vulnerable and amazing.
Thank you.
I appreciate you so much. And do you have any final words? I always ask, do you have any final words to leave the listeners with?
Just that I'm here. If you want to connect, I actually, on my business cards, I give my cell phone information out because it means a lot to me to help others. If God chose to do this, then I need to use it for him, And so you can connect with me on social media at Be an Overcomer, the letter B, and then an overcomer, not BE, because that was taken. So, or my website is www.beanovercomerministries.com.
Great.
So I would love to connect with you if you need some help kind of managing through that process, or even just to let me know your story. Like it's just encouraging when I hear that that I'm able to kind of speak life into others. So feel free to reach out in any way.
And listeners, I will link up to all that information and also share some photos, because some people, listening might want to see your journey.
Yeah.
We'll share some photos as well on Twitter. It's at Unbroken the Pod, and you can find us on Facebook. It's called the Unbroken Circle, so you guys can go and join that group, and I'll post more there. Tiffany, thank you so much again for coming in. I appreciate you.
Oh, it was such an honor. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to Unbroken the Podcast. We'll see you next time.